Wait a minute. Hello, people. Good afternoon. Something is going on. We are here live. People are signing up. Uh, Hold on 1 second, because there's another one. People are logging on rather. Um, Hi everyone who's logging in to watch this. Um, this is going to be a very, um, I think, just incredible conversation. But I need to just give me a second, y'all. We are about getting it started, getting it going. But navigating Black love and life in white America. And I'll just say, this topic came about as or in regard to just multiple ongoing conversations that I have in my circles with different friend groups. And, we were just having some very intense conversations about the reality of trying to exist within, a very oppressive environment here in white America, having to navigate all of these systems, all of these institutions, um, cultural damage where that is a result of Black people being positioned as like a derogatory race of people or group of people, and how all of that causes and produces a strain um, on all of our relationships, parenting, parenting relationships between children, but in spousal relationships between people, whether they are heterosexual and or gay, or bi or whatever. But the reality is that we're not able to love freely without the disruption and the intrusion of having to navigate white systems. And I'm talking about something as simple as belonging to and participating within the confines of an exploitative system and an exploitative culture, whereby you have people at the top who, through whether it's their familial positionality and or they've been networked in, they've been networked into these powerful positions whereby they are getting rich and maintaining their wealth by exploiting other people. And so we have to understand that existing within a white, capitalistic power structure that uses people as widgets to make money, perpetuate the economic success of this country, as well as to maintain power. We have to understand what that then does to the people who make up the culture, and specifically where Black people are concerned. We've never known love as Black people in America without trauma. And so we're going to explore a multitude of different issues as I see them and topics. And I've asked some very beautiful individuals to join me today. One being my dear sister, Jessica Brown, who's on, she has and I'm just sharing this, some accolades, a master's in public health and also a master's in social work. So she just does a lot of work in some very important areas. And as someone who specializes in clinical care, it was very important to have her voice as well as a few others. So there are some other Black women who will be signing on to join me momentarily, and you'll see them pop up too. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce my dear sister, Jessica Brown, and just have her speak a few words to all of you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dante. I just appreciate, of course, being here. We were here together last time talking about my experience in trying to navigate the health system when it comes to advocating for my children. And so we're back again. This topic definitely interests me because it is very dear to my heart. I think as Black people, we desire to be in relationships with each other, whether that's platonic or romantic. And there's a lot of discussions online about what Black women need to do, what Black men need to do. But none of those discussions provide the foundation of how our relationships have always been broken up by white supremacy culture, broken up and surveilled. So I think it's important to really understand that foundation so that we can have grace and love for each other. And that really we can really come into our relationships understanding that we have navigated a generations of horror done to us, and how each of us, Black men, Black women, have had to watch each other not only go through the trauma and the experiences, but also experiencing them ourselves. And so, I'm happy today to be here with my brother, who is also amazing and who has also helped me see the ways in which that I have participated in anti-Blackness within my relationships. So, and how to dismantle that. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jess. I'm glad that you're back. I know Shauna was supposed to be joining, but she had something come up with a family member who's in town, so she may not be joining. Rochelle may be here, is supposed to be here. And then our dear sister Alexis is logging on. I don't have my phone with me, so I don't know if she's like maybe reaching out. So that may be the case. People might be trying to sign in or come on. In any case, I always approach things from a historical standpoint because that's my work. Oh, I see. I see Russia. Russia says, I'm here trying to log on. Okay. It's all good, sis. We're in the space. Come on when you can. Um, but yeah, so I think what I was saying is like I always come at things from a historical standpoint. And, the first statement that I led with was the reality that we've not ever been able to love without trauma, and just how true that became for me when I started, or not necessarily started, but as I continued along my research journey, there was so much information that I was finding that began to color my perspective, or not just color, but inform me about the very real experiences, the very real traumatic experiences that had been done to Black men and Black women as they were transported into the Americas. And so I wanted to maybe start off, kinda, so to speak, um, by, hold on for 1 second, by maybe sharing some historical examples. But before I do, um, yeah, Jessica, did you have any thoughts about that? Just kind of about maybe reflections on the realized degrees and magnitudes of trauma and terror and the things that have been done to Black people.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you highlight in your fellowship is the notion that our capturers knew exactly who they were capturing. And one of the things that they did was they designed the slave ships to be divided, where they would divide men and women. And they would put the men in the most horrible conditions as a way to break them, and put women and children in another way because they were vulnerable. And I thought that was very profound, because I think we always thought that we were together. I don't know. I always thought we were together in these slave quarters on these ships. But even thinking about that start of, let's divide them. You know what I mean? Let's divide the women and children from the men, because I think that they knew that our men would protect us and would be trying to take over those ships. And there are cases where that did happen. So I think for me, where you highlighted the initial start of this was a division of us as they were enslaving us to take us to, the Americas.
Jessica, I'm telling you, and this is why I love our interactions and our dialogue, because you will say certain things, right, as my sister, as my best friend, but also someone who has been involved in a variation of different exercises with me, from 2-day trainings to 12-week trainings to 16-week. And what it allows you to do is recall certain information that was covered throughout those experiences. There are some things that I don't even recollect that I covered, because the breadth and the reach of my work is so expansive and so large that I sometimes forget. But as you were speaking about that, what you're referring to, and I had to further investigate this as well, but there is an account by a surgeon, and I'm actually going to share, if I may, these two examples. I see Alexis; she just came on. So wait 1 second. I'm actually going to share, and then once Alexis comes on, I'll have her share a few words, and then I'll try to figure out what's going on, Rochelle, so I can get you the link so you can come on too. So here's what I am sharing. Well, you know what? Let me add Alexis before I share this.
I sent Rochelle the link, so Rochelle just checking for her email from me, because I sent you the link.
Oh, you did? Okay, thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Hello, dear sister.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's good.
They can hear the queen. So, not this one, but no. So Alexis, is joining us, and she is someone who is profoundly special to me. She's another one of my sisters that I met along this journey. We've been knowing each other now for about 7 years, and we've just grown a lot together through this journey. I don't know if you want to tell your story, Alexis, about how we met, but you can just give a little quick.
I'll do a quick overview, and I think it actually ties into the topic today. So I met Dante. I was working on a project. Someone told me I needed to talk to him. We just kept missing each other. So he finally says to me, just come to my training. It's the Monday, or it was 2 days and 8-hour days. And I was like, I don't want to, I only want to talk to this man for 20 minutes. I don't need to be in no 2-day, 8-hour a day thing. So I went begrudgingly, but, definitely the training changed my life, opened my perspective. And one epiphany I remember having during that training is that understanding all this history and what Black people have gone through in this country made every relationship dynamic that we were experiencing make sense. So I think that there's what we said about the historical context and how that's influenced our present day relationship dynamics, and how, often, or at least what they put forth in the media, because actually people I know in real life don't do this, but in the media, you think that we're blaming each other for things, when really this whiteness, white supremacist culture that we're living in, and this the psychosis that we have to deal with from those people is exactly why our relationship dynamics are the way they are today.
For sure. Absolutely. Everything from being extremely anti-female, anti-women driven. That is what white patriarchy represents and what has been infused throughout this culture and our institutions, but also grooming Black male behavior to mirror that of white male behavior. And I don't think that gets emphasized enough, or a light is not shined on that reality. There's so much of a hyper focus on what Black boys and Black men are doing that we never take time out to understand that white men and white boys are programmed and are also acting out the reality of these same behaviors and worse, much worse, right? Which is why we can talk about then, for example, violence that happens in the streets of Oakland, California, and all of these pathologies and really myths that Black men are murdering each other and killing each other. Meanwhile, you've got young white males who are, over 90% of the domestic terrorists in this country going into schools, massacring young children, rounding them up, just outright going into movie theaters, murdering people. That violence gets subdued. It's not recognized or acknowledged in the same ways in which the behavioral patterns of Black boys and Black males are spotlighted in this culture. And so it became very clear to me how Black male behavior has been directly influenced. We've been groomed by white men. The lack of emotionality, the lack of an ability to really engage feelings and relate, that comes right out of this cultural context. So anyway, there's so much more I could say. Before I move ahead, and before I go to the examples that I was going to share, I want to just welcome another one of my dear sisters, who we have fallen in love with each other. We have a love fest going on. But my sister Rochelle, Dr. Rochelle Hooks, who is just a phenomenal person. Jessica always teases me. She's like, "Oh, all right, you got to vet these people you add into our family." And I said, "It's okay. I know Jess. We call Jess. She's the youngest. We call her the little bully. Okay, I'm just joking. Okay, Rochelle. So yeah, please introduce yourself."
Absolutely. Thank you. I met Dante, as many people have, on his journey at a conference, and what he said absolutely resonated with me. From the title of his workshop, I was immediately drawn. And, usually when you go to conferences, you kind of sit in the back. I sat in the front of the front. So I was just drawn to him and what you said. And ever since, it's been a love relationship. You have, like I said, over and over again, you've opened my eyes to ways that I too, like Jessica was saying, was practicing anti-Blackness and didn't even realize it, putting value on things that was not very valuable, and just getting closer to whiteness. And you have helped me begin my journey in healing myself and working with my family, just to have better outcomes, better expectations, and not stress about things that I don't need to be stressing about. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I just so appreciate you and Jessica for acknowledging what you said about like working through your own process and being on this journey, because it's the same for me. Yes, I'm doing this work. Yes, I've written books, but I am on a continuous journey to better understand these dynamics, how they function in my life, how they function in my family, the larger Black community. And so I've said, and I will say again here, that I am on a journey to recover from anti-Blackness and white supremacy, because I recognize it and see it so clearly in all of us. The example that I was going to go to, though, that Jessica made me reflect on, came from information that I initially learned when I took a trip to Baltimore. I took a trip to Baltimore, Maryland, specifically with the intent to visit a museum there, which is called the Blacks in Wax Museum. And upon going to that museum, I located, and I'm going to share with you just a lot of pictures, a lot of information that I was able to collect. And they have a depiction in that museum of a slave ship and some other information. And so I'm going to share some of the pictures from the slave ship. Well, I'll actually start with some, to give you all kind of the full experience, with some photos of Elmina Castle, which is located in Ghana. So here we go. And I'm going to read the passages that Jessica was referencing. This is the dungeon. This is one of the doors that they went out of prior to being boarded onto ships. And they said that this room would be packed so high, they'd be squished in this room together so badly that there was a number of people, dozens, that did not make it, that would not make it, that would die because they had to defecate together. They, urinated. There was just what we think about as unsanitary. Multiply that times 1 million or infinitely. And so you have people who are being specifically targeted, who are agriculturalists, who are landowners, who are mathematical geniuses, who are scholars, professors that are being targeted through force and kidnapped and pillaged and forced to enter into a cultural context that they are not just unfamiliar with, but from the onset of becoming a captive of either an African person that is engaged in trafficking in humans, or a European person that is engaged in the same operations. It is a traumatic experience. And then you're put aboard a ship. This is a depiction of the Daphne, where you have no associates. Your family is not there. Like, most of the people are unrecognizable, and you're trying to make sense of what's happening to you. So the experience is very traumatic. There's a movie about this too. It's titled after the song "Amazing Grace" because Captain John Newton, he wrote that song, but he's talking about how full the ships are with bodies, and how, ever so often they wake up to find that there are many people who have died because of the unsanitary conditions, and they were, as we know, throwing them overboard. But he was a minister, he was a slave ship captain who, at the end of his life, he repented, so to speak, as a lot of white people do. They repent once the madness has been done. And then, he became a minister, right? So he's also the author of the song "Amazing Grace" as well. But to Jessica's recollection, right, and these are some pictures from the Black and Wax Museum. I shared these pictures, and I also shared some additional information that I collected along my journey. And so we can see here just kind of people being beheaded, people stacked along the shelves, the aisles, as it has been written by many, many different accounts of how the slave voyages were. So this account by a surgeon by the name of Alexander Falconbridge, he says, on the slave ship, the quarters for the Black women are always below the rooms of the officers and crew, separate from the Black men. Sailors and officers are permitted to indulge their passion among them at pleasure, and sometimes are guilty of brutal excesses that would disgrace human nature. And so when I saw this depiction, it riveted me, because to Jessica's point, I had not understood, or never been compelled to think about the reality of just open season sexual predation where Black girls and women were concerned. And so this account says, this is from the department, the archives from France, 1777, Captain List was worse than his crew members in taking advantage of the defenseless female slaves. Felipe List pushed his brutality to the point of violating a little Negro girl of 8 to 10 years whose mouth he closed to prevent her from screaming. So how then can people who are going through this type of tragic abuse and it not ever being fully interrogated, engaged, and them not feeling any protection, how does that make for being able to be healthy or in a space where you're able to be in relationship with anyone, or you're able to be healthily available psychologically and emotionally to parent that child that you're having, to be in other supportive and healthy relationships with other Black women? I mean, these experiences inform every area and aspect of our lives. And so I'd like to get, your thoughts on what I just shared.
There's that unmute button. As you pointed that out, also in chapter 3 of your diagnosing whiteness and anti-Blackness, like you, from the very onset, you demonstrated the permission for Black women to be raped. And if that is your foundation of being and knowing, it makes you feel powerless, less than, and that's a hard fight to come back from. In one of the particular story you pointed out, even though it was not on the slave ship, but even after slavery, the one particular story, that horrific story about Reese Taylor, but she knew who the rapists were, but there was still no recourse, and her husband wasn't even able to protect her. So it continues to manifest not only with women, but beyond the women. So that's to me it's very challenging to have a normalcy after that type of treatment. You're muted.
Sorry, y'all. I'm over here getting some other stuff together too. But I was saying I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I thank you for sharing that perspective. And then I called in Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, it's I have so many thoughts on it because it's extremely traumatic to hear, and then that's just us coming over here, right? Then when we get here, we have these breeding plantations that I don't think a lot of people know about, because they don't show us that. They show us the cotton fields. They don't show us the plantations where they were forcing Black men to rape Black women and Black girls in order to continue to breed us, right? And so when I'm thinking about this, the horrors of it and how it's been kind of socialized and normalized, to Rochelle's point, that evilness and dysfunction and predatory behavior has been socialized into us. So when we hear about the sex trafficking of young girls, when we hear about the sex trafficking of young boys, I don't think we are connecting that to our iteration of being here, the inception of being here, and what we've experienced as a people, and that epigenetics that continues. Just real quickly, when I first had my daughter, I kept having visions of someone taking her, of these white people coming into my home and taking my daughter for crying so loud. And I don't even know why I had that, right? But as I'm looking more into just the ways that this is passed down to us, where it's embedded in our DNA, it could have been that this was an ancestor of mine who experienced that, right? Of course. And so I'm feeling that very deeply. And it's hard for me to even think about being in that time, because I have a young daughter, and seeing some white person, some adult male, just be able to take her whenever he wanted to. And I don't think, as we talk about our relationship with each other, that we consider that sexual trauma that has been both put on Black men and Black women enough. We don't talk about how that leads to even our sexual addiction or even our sexual trauma, because we've never had ownerships of our bodies. And I think that has to, in these discussions about how we have better relationships, that has to come in. that's not so far removed from us. Some of our grandmothers and grandfathers experienced rape and sexual abuse. Some of us experienced sexual abuse and rape. And so, that's this country's orientation, and that's how they see Black women and Black girls, but also that's how they see women in general here. It just happens on us because there's this narrative that we do not have ownership and our humanization is not applied to us. But it really that seeing those images, Dante, really it brings a point home of how these things have been embedded in us, and they've been socialized and normalized into us as we're witnessing this.
Agreed, absolutely. And I want to hit on another piece, but I'll do it out after I bring you in, Alexis, because y'all know y'all will say one thing and it will trigger me to go. So Jessica, you said a lot, and I want to come back to something that you just pointed out. Alexis?
I agree with everything that's been said. And just, adding on to that dynamic. So there's the sexual trauma and the piece of like your body's not yours and anybody can come in and do whatever they want at any time. But I think the other side of it is that also at that time, right, the way society was set up, women didn't work, men protected women, whatever, right? They are putting the message forth that these men cannot protect you. And they're letting the man know that too, right? We will make it so that you're able to protect. So then we fast forward to today, where we're still trying to fit into these white supremacist ideals of the man provides and protects. And it's been set up for, in general, right, our men not to be able to provide or protect. So then we're over here, he's not doing this and he's not doing that, right? So it just back to the point that understanding all this history just makes everything that we experience today make so much sense. And I think even the way that we're looking at each other for partnership, right? Obviously I'm generalizing, but he got to protect and provide. She got to be able to, do these sexual things in this way and cook and clean and all that stuff, right? So just that even like what we're looking for, not looking at character and value and morals, but like, are you checking these things off on a list, right?
Yeah, you're talking about the sociocultural programming, the way that we've been programmed in terms of what we value, the things that we deem important within the confines of a toxic culture, because the toxic culture has made these things important. And so for young boys and men, emotions become unimportant. You are seen as weak if you're able to engage your emotions. And then you've got the power structure that then incentivizes, for example, Black men. Let's just talk about the rap industry. You have a power structure. It's not the Black men that's doing this, right? The Black men are talking about their experiences and what they've been surrounded by and what they know and the things that have happened in their neighborhood. But you've got a white power structure that will then take Black men named Snoop Dogg, Black men named Dr. Dre, Black men, and produce and then put money behind a machine, behind an album and a song called Doggy Style, in videos that project and center Black women. And if this is the only means of survival for people, those are the opportunities that they are going to take advantage of. But let's be very clear. It's the hypersexualization of the Black male. It is the hypersexualization of the Black female. And this is all coming at our demise, essentially, because it is destructive. White America promotes destructive behavior where Black and brown people are concerned, specifically where Black people are concerned. And so we have to understand then the politics of hypersexualization and the economics of hypersexualization. Because going back to Rochelle's point, going back to Jessica's point, the sub-institution, or I would say the co-institution of that of slavery that never gets named, is the implementation of legalized and customized rape culture, legalized pedophilia. These are legal, political, and economic institutions in America. And to understand the reality of it, I'm also going to share an additional piece that hardly ever gets highlighted. Give me 1 second. And then I'd love to bring you back in too, Jessica, and then Alexis, and then you too, Rochelle. But looking at, for example, the age of consent, the historical age of consent and marriage for girls. So we can see here that in England, back in the 13th century, the year 1275, they established that the age of consent for girls upon marriage is 12 years old. That law, under the English power structure, then the American US power structure, remains in effect until roughly the 1890s. 1880s, 1890s, the US culture has adopted that. By 1920, the age of consent, after the white women started this reform movement, by 1920, the age of consent was roughly 16 years old across the board in most states. But you have a culture of predation. So English common law, which heavily influenced the early legal framework of the United States, established the age of consent for marriage and sexual relations. Under common law, the age of consent for marriage and sexual activity was set at 12 years old for girls and 14 years old for boys. This standard was widely adopted in colonial America and persisted well into the 19th century. So you could be betrothed, engaged at age 10. At age 10, and it was questionable whether, if a young girl had been assaulted, being above the age of 10 years old, at or above the age of 10 years old, it was questioned whether or not it was actually rape, because they believed that by age 10, young girls could consent. Thoughts?
Again, and I think it goes back to, just as I stated earlier, this evilness that is not us. And so when we are thinking about how our boys, our Black men, how our Black women are socializing to predatory behaviors, because the start of it was white men. And you seen, in that picture, that man is well over age. To a little girl. And you think about too how thinking about our children now, what in their right mind would think that a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old would be of that a consent? And I think going back to what we talked about earlier, those breeding plantations, and when a young Black woman got her period, sending her over to that breeding plantation to again help their economic interests, no matter what horror and what age it was for us. And so I just, I have so many thoughts that it plays a part into some of the narratives that we see today, the way that young women are sex trafficked, including in some of these institutions like the NFL, the NBA. All these larger entities are taking on the ideology that we've had in the past of not valuing women and young girls and young boys as well. And like you said earlier, Dante, really socializing young men to become predators.
Yes.
Everything that we do, the rap music, the TV, it's all to socialize men, particularly Black men, into being predators.
Absolutely. And we have to understand white male predatory hypersexual behavior and the perversion that's located within and throughout the white community that never gets spoken about, that hardly gets spoken about, that makes it so that white people are able to project throughout this country and around the world images of their family values, images of themselves as astute, responsible people who kind of have it all together. And so there is this psychological myth, is what I'll call it, or psychological delusion that people have in terms of how we are compelled and socialized to think and believe about white people, white men, and white women. We're not compelled or programmed to see them as hypersexual beings, as predators, as all of these things. But to Jessica's point, we have to understand that historically into the present, they have shaped rather and designed all of these realities that we see before our eyes today. And so if ever, whenever there is a question about or an observation about what Black women are doing or what Black men or boys are doing, we must understand that white men are responsible. And that is what my book lays bare. And it's not the blame game for the sake of trying to not be accountable or throw off any responsibility. It is to put forth a set of facts that actually prove what I'm saying. It's not my opinion at all. You can see it, for example, and I'll just share some images before I bring you in, Alexis, or some examples. And I shared some of these previously, but I'm sharing them for the sake of our talk today. In 1662, you've got in this law, this ruling rather, in Virginia by the General Assembly or the House of Burgesses and the Grand Assembly that saw this case, but they ruled that the heredity of slavery as a legal condition, as a legal identity or class of a person would be confined to the uteruses and the vaginas of Black women. In this one ruling, they said, you know what? We're not going to hold white men accountable, the white men who are raping these women accountable and fathering these babies, because we don't want the white males implicated at all. And we need to ensure, both for political, economic, and cultural purposes, and Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, also to ensure that we are not genetically annihilated, we need to ensure that white men are not implicated as they are widely raping these Black women. And so they say that the identity of the child is now going to be transferred to that of the mother, the Black woman. So the white man no longer has to take responsibility. They're not implicated in the rapes of these women. That goes unacknowledged from this point on, legally unrecognizable. They're not implicated in parenting the children. They can have they can commit as many rapes as possible, leave as many children around as possible, and there's no responsibility. And this becomes very important, everyone, because I want you to think about what message this is sending to Black boys and Black men about how you treat and regard Black women and girls. How do you also respond to when you father a child? You see before you a whole culture of people just going about raping Black women, raping Indigenous women, raping white women, even their wives, but they're leaving a multitude of children around throughout the colonies and throughout the states. And Black men are being groomed and socialized to also commit these predatory acts where Black girls and women are concerned. So how then does this shape the interrelations between the groups? Because even if I'm a mother, if I'm birthing children, I may not be able to fully embrace my male child because so much trauma has happened to me. And then that male child is socialized to think of me, his sisters, and as Jezebel, as this, as that. It is so incredibly complicated. So Alexis and then Rochelle.
I just, going back to your, when you were taking us through the law and when the ages of consent started to change, I would say that probably only happened on the books, because I think even in current climate, you will still see adult males approaching young girls. I think, as I'm not going to speak for the other women on the panel, but I'm pretty sure we share an experience of being underage and being approached by adult males, even as young as 11, 12. And then online, you see all the, if she's 18, then I'm doing this. And it's like 18-year-olds are still in high school, so it's like if she's 18, then that means you don't have a problem if she was 17, right? Or if she was 16. So I think that we still see it. It's not on the books anymore, but we still see it in the culture of like, this is what if I want to do this to any woman or girl, I can. That age really doesn't matter to people. And that, you know, it's on the books because I think of other things we have in society now where you're like, you got to go to school to a certain age. You got to do those types of things have kind of started to influence that age of consent. But I just think it's awful that it's still a current day, present dynamic. And then I also wanted to touch on, Jessica had brought up like tying the connection to human trafficking. And I think that often when people hear human trafficking, they think of women coming from other countries, particularly like Asian countries. But I know they did a study. I don't know if this is true across the US, but I know they did a study like in the Bay Area, and it's actually Black girls that are being the most trafficked, Black girls out of the foster care system, right? And so it's like, there's just so many levels and layers of even how we're ending up there, right?
It's true.
Connecting all these things.
To your point though too, Alexis, in this for example, and not that we're going to stay here, but the age of consent conversation, if you have an age of consent, go with me, standards being set by men about how girls and women's bodies work or should work, and the age by which they should be able to be fully mature, fully adult, like all of these standards are being set by men. Do we even know if 18 is the proper age by which that somebody should be considered an adult who is female, right? But you all have not ever had that agency to even set the standards that determine when you should or may be ready.
Yeah, and I think, Alexis, you brought up a good point when we were talking before about how teen pregnancy has gone down because of the age of consent going up, and that just shows, you know, how this predatory behavior of the lowering of the age of consent, you know, how these teenage moms were being impregnated by older men, right? And I think, Dante, just real quick, what you really brought up to me is that we have suffered through a cognitive distortion when it comes to white people's morality. And so being in a situation where we are thinking that these people hold the moral compass when they really have, as you look at all the laws, created a system of, as you know, human trafficking, sex trafficking, predatory behavior, rape and genocide culture. We have been in a delusion thinking that that is a normal standard and that is part of how our cultural influences, right? Not tying it back to what we've been socialized into participating in.
Right. Or that like the nature of epigenetics is not true or persistent in the white community. And we know that it is. And I think that's another important conversation, because how can the people who structured and participated in human trafficking to create the gross domestic product, the GDP for this country, and make it as rich of a country as it is, right, and a power player, and those same people who set up institutions of rape culture, economically, politically, and legally, as well as pedophilia, how can these people then somehow be the moral standard or set the moral standard? And or when did they change their tune? Was it when they created the porn industry and magazines that showcased and featured women as hypersexualized figures? Was it when they started creating the movie industry and movies about people going out and committing murders and perpetuating the violence? When did the nature of the psychology of white people and the people that have developed and who run these institutions, when did that change? But yet we in our minds, we're not compelled to ever think about it or interrogate it in ways that would help us to understand and be able to make connections about the present and how the past has influenced the present. So I'm going to get you to come in here, my sister Rochelle.
Yeah, thank you. I too, like Alexis, looking at that picture, that looked like that little girl's grandfather, not even her father, but her grandfather with him. And at 10 years old, you're in fourth grade, you're not even having a period yet. And so that's awful. That is rape. And before we had the discussion about the behavior of how you mentioned the slave owners going around and having babies unresponsible for, and they are the prototype. That behavior is the prototype for baby daddy. Like that that is the epitome of baby daddy.
Absolutely, Rochelle. And I'm going to go this because last week when we were going through the book review, I shared kind of this example, and I talked about how it really opened my eyes so much more. But this is from Harriet Jacobs' book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And she says, my master was, to my knowledge, the father of 11 slaves. But did the mothers dare to tell who was the father of their children? Did the other slaves dare to allude to it, except in whispers among themselves? No, indeed. They knew too well the terrible consequences. So think about this. You've got a white man on this one account that Jacobs is giving, where she's saying he was the father of at least 11 children, and he just got to go around and rape women and spread his seed, right? Not take any responsibility for the brutal behavior, the psychopathic behavior, the psychopathic mindset underlying those actions. He was not made to take responsibility for the children. So think about that. There's a permission structure that is set up to not only just disregard women, mistreat girls and women, but you can go around and spread your seed to as many as possible. And I want you all to think about this and to just comment. And I'll start with you, Alexis, and then we'll go to Rochelle, then go to Jessica. How does this then inform, for example, people like Nick Cannon? Or the one guy that I forget, the football player.
Cam Newton.
Yeah, Cam Newton. How does this then inform that behavior? It's made it okay. And women are not just unprotected, but infinitely vulnerable.
I like the point that you're helping to bring to the table, because I think often we know, because of anti-Blackness, people can look at the behaviors of Black people and make it about them or us, right? But I think that looking at that being the model and thinking about how often it occurred, I heard Dr. Joy DeGruy was speaking, and she was bringing up the point that the level of rape was so prevalent that today, if you're a descendant of an enslaved African, you have a significant portion of European ancestry in you, even today, right? All the way down to today. So that lets us know the level and how often this rape was occurring all the time. And so that means that's what people were seeing. And it's just making all these connections to the point of like men producing children and not feeling like they need to be responsible for them, or that they don't have to have a role in their life. I think there's like a young athlete, I don't know if he's basketball or something, that just
Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, paid the 18 years of child support up front, so he don't got to pay nothing. And he's said, I don't want anything to do with the kid and all this stuff. And I'm like, that is your child. Like, how could you just be disconnected? But then thinking about the behaviors that we observe from white men, they had children, they were producing children and then enslaving their children and not giving a damn about them, right? So because the mother was Black, like it's a lot. There's a lot of things going on there. Yeah, so this is making me think about a lot.
Yeah, Alexis, I agree, and we too have that same psychosis, and that's why we need help too. And I do appreciate the through line, because yes, Dante, you're talking about historical events and tying it to today, which to me is extremely important. So we can see that these behaviors haven't changed. We haven't gotten well. We haven't recognized it. And Alexis, I agree with you. It's not just looking at what happened, but what's been happening, what's supporting it to continue to happen in this way. And I as you showed, Nick Cannon, he also needs help. It's not just about finances. That's not what it takes to raise children. It's your time, it's your energy, your guidance. So
right.
we need help too.
And I think in those examples, they are severely misguided. I know Nick Cannon tries to tie his fathering of multiple children to how we were in Africa. And I think that is a misrepresentation of what it meant for us we were intentional parents. While there might have been polygamy, there was also monogamy. There was also, but those communities did things from a very intentional place of community and raising children. That's not what we're socialized to do here. And Alexis, I thought that was a brilliant point that you made. We've seen white men discard and detach from their children, even put them in slavery. So yes, we were forced to be socialized to detach. And a lot of our Black men, giving their lack of power in that situation, or lack of humanity for that as well, did not have the power to protect and build an emotional attachment to their children. And they just pass that on to what we're seeing today. The other thing I think too, what I think is even more is very predacious about Cam Newton and Nick Cannon is, and Cam Newton just said this on one of his podcasts, how he purposely goes after women's souls. And so he uses a tactic of manipulation and sociopathness to get women to put their guard down, to give them their all in order to take their souls. And I don't even think he realizes how much that is rooted in anti-Blackness and white supremacy culture. He thinks that's rooted in his ego and being the definition of a man, right? And that's right. And we saw another clip too of a man saying, I don't like you as a woman. I just want to have sex with you, but I don't want to tell you that because then you won't give me the sex. And so I think Black men have to reconcile with their socialization of hating women, because a lot of it comes from the hate of women, and that not just your relationship with their mothers, because that is also real, but also the cultural standard of hating women and devaluing them, and also discarding women and young girls.
Absolutely, Jessica, because I want to amplify that point that you made when you quoted what he said, because what he specifically amplified was that he used the term collect. He likes to collect women's souls. But specifically, here's the part that I thought was sociopathic. He says, particularly women who are with other people. So he's intentionally targeting women who are in relationships. And he says he delights in, and it feels really good for when he goes around collecting women's souls when they belong to someone else. So he's not even just talking about women who are available. It's almost like a sport, or it is a sport to him. And that is what is so alarming, because you're talking about the denigration of women, the defilement of their bodies, and anyone wanting to throw an African reference in, or this is the way the Romans did it, who is to say that those playbooks were right either? And that's what we have to contend with, because we don't, we're not programmed to respect or accept or encourage women to go around and have as many partners as they can have, or as many husbands. It's not a double standard. It's a cruel programming, whereby we have been programmed to expect and think that it is okay for males to go around and really just traffic themselves. But not only that, because within the framework, within the actual framework, the reality of that type of behavior, you're dealing with people who are not able to relate or connect and stay in one place. This is unstable behavior. These are unstable people. These people are not socialized in ways where they are even remotely ready to be, connected to anyone in a responsible way. And so again, I am not, and let me be very clear, this is not about talking about and isolating Black boys and men. No, this is about making connection into the ways in which we have been socialized and influenced by predators who are white males who have controlled everything about the cultural, institutional landscape in our society. That is what this is about, and how it then has impacted and shaped the nature of our love for each other, what we call love, which may not even be love, the way that it has shaped the ways in which we have been programmed to regard each other. And I'm going to get to the way that Black girls and women have been programmed to see Black men as well, because that is a very important part in this conversation. Because the version of Black men that you're in touch with is a version that's been corrupted by the people who have had total sovereignty and jurisdiction over what the Black male should be in American society. Anyone want to respond to that before I go to my next examples?
Well, I appreciate you having the balance, because I do think that it is important to talk about how these dynamics impact both of us, and to hold us accountable for some of the toxicity that also, Black women can portray on young Black boys and men. Because I do think again, in these conversations that you might hear over the internet, none of the historical references are mentioned. It's all about what we're not doing with each other. And I think we have to really go back into how we have been brainwashed into seeing each other in order to really be able to hold us accountable. So I do appreciate you having space for both, because I think it's important in order for us to get to our liberation and healing, and to be able to love each other better.
Absolutely. I just want to also just put out here, there are a host of courses that are on my website, which is danteking.com. And I put the link in the chat for those of you who are interested in maybe signing up for a course. I am doing a Black Academics boot camp in person on Saturday, July 19th in Oakland, California. So if anyone is in the area, or anyone wants to fly in and you're interested in attending, where we will go through an intensive that highlights a bunch more of this information over an 8 to 9 hour period, please reach out through my website on the contact page. And someone will get back in touch with you about registering you for the Black Academics Bootcamp. Right now, I think I have about 10 more free open slots. If you want to attend and have your registration fee waived, you can go to the website. So there's that. And then I was going to go to, before I move on to how this has shaped how we see and view Black men, and also how it's shaped how Black men have been programmed and socialized to exist under the confines of a label called Black that was projected upon us for the purposes of our oppression. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. But what I wanted to highlight, because I talk about a number of cases in chapter 3, one being the Celia case. I also quote directly from the slave narratives, right? So, and this is what was important for me when I talk about the grooming. So I'm going to just share a few more examples from here. And this is from the book Slave Breeding. During the Great Depression, formerly enslaved African Americans shared their memories of Southern slavery with interviewers from the Works Progress Administration. Between 1936 and 1938, more than 2,000 former slaves from 17 states narrated their recollections of slavery. According to the former slaves, slave breeding relied on the existence of plantation studs or bucks and breeding winches. The language that some slaves used to represent coercive sexual acts was sensational, but it served an important narrative purpose. It reflected the moral depth or immoral depths that slaves believed white men and women had stooped to in order to keep them enslaved. Julia Malone, for example, remembered that her mother was a breeding wench Think about that terminology. My mom's a breeding wench. That's her job. That's her full-time job. That's what she does. She claimed my mammy was a big woman. Peter Brown insisted that slave masters prized fast breeders. So now you get a prize because you're able to bear these children healthily at 8 months, maybe 7 months, but you're having them and they're surviving. So we're going to give you a trophy and or a certificate. You might even get to eat a nice cooked meal inside of the house for a week. We're going to incentivize you. Brown stated that his mother was a fast breeder, giving birth to 3 sets of twins. Steve Robertson reminisced about his father's sexual prowess, referring to the existence of plantation bucks. Robertson testified that the master picks the buck for to sire the children with women that they want. So let's get this straight. You have Black boys and men being selected to go around and just choose whichever victims they want to target, and then they go and they're locked in a cabin together and forced. The Black girl and women or woman or both are forced to submit. They're forced to submit their will. They're forced to submit their bodies. And these Black men are also forced to rape them. We're talking about cultural, institutional, legal, both on the political spectrum, the legal spectrum, the economic spectrum of rape and pedophilia, right? The prevalence of it, right? President Thomas Jefferson saying, I know no error more consuming to an estate than that of stocking it with men almost exclusively. He says, when you go to the slave auction, don't stock it with men. You should be purchasing the women and girls, because as you set them up to be raped, perpetually, they can bear more children. I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man on the farm. What she produces, the amount of children that she can have, is in addition to the capital. It's in addition to her labor, or in addition to any labor that 1 or 2 men could produce. That's where your riches are. That's where your interest should be. And so we're talking about a cultural institution permission structure where white men set up institutions of rape. These are pimps. These are pedophiles. And they're orchestrated in very strategic ways, in very official ways into this culture. They're orchestrated and embedded into the culture. Rochelle, Alexis.
Yeah, when you shared that before, you really turned my thought process upside down about how we revel and celebrate and how the President's Day and our founding forefathers. And you said, well, what if we said exactly what they were doing and who they were, and said, our forefathers were pedophiles, they were rapists, they were pimps, they were drug traffickers. That would spin the whole narrative in a quite different way. And I still feel like today we are still treated as a commodity, whether it's for our body, whether it's for our style, whether it's for you name it. I still feel like we're still a commodity.
Absolutely. Everything is about commodifying. It's about, we are all commodities. That's all we are to the people who are in control of the institutions. Alexis?
What was coming up for me as we were reading that narrative, just really like putting myself in that space and thinking, these men and women potentially like grew up together, right, as children. And then so now they even threw Dante in a room with Jessica, Alexis, and Rochelle and said, have kids. Like, so what did that do to the psyche, to the relationship, just all of that? And how is that influencing the interactions and relationships all the way up until today?
Yes, Alexis, because the other thing that we know too is that interfamilial marriage was customary in the culture. So you could end up raping your sister, or because that's who these people were marrying. They were marrying cousins. They were marrying brothers and sisters getting together. We're talking about a no holds bar.
Not to mention they fathering all the children on the plantation anyway, right? So
Yes.
11 of these kids.
a no holds barred society. And Jessica, I see you wanting to come in.
Well, no, I agree exactly with what Rochelle and Alexis said. I'm just also thinking too on the side of, you know, the Black men and Black boys who didn't want to rape and didn't want to do that, and then being forced to do it because of the severe consequences, and what happened to those that resisted, right? They were probably instantly murdered, right? And so I just think, you know, we don't talk about enough the sexual abuse that Black men have endured in enslavement. We both were raped, and also too thinking about
Absolutely.
how a lot of the Black men and Black boys, and I know I might be jumping, even our fetishization of white women is false, because we don't ever give into the information or the facts about how white women also raped young Black boys and Black
yes
in that time period too, because they also own plantations. And so that never comes into the fold about how these Black men were really forced to become they were raped into being sex addicts and abusers and predators. Absolutely.
Yes. And so what then, through these experiences, are Black boys and men learning about what it even means to be a Black boy or man? They knew within the confines of their original cultural context what it may have been to be a Ugandan boy, you know, outside of the reality of trauma. But now you're forced into a traumatic reality, and now your identity has changed. You're Black, and you're becoming Black, and the whole cultural orchestration and evolution is being led by people who are demonic predators. And so now you're learning what it now means to be a Black boy or a man, and that behavior is patterned directly after your captors. So I'm going to go to another example, right? Because I think this becomes very important to just what we were talking about, and then I'm going to switch gears in just a second to go and highlight some of the Black male experiences that began to emerge throughout the colony. So, or throughout the colonial period. So give me 1 second. Pull this up here, and I want you to think about what you are about to see. Like you that are on here, maybe minus Alexis, has seen this before because you've been in some of the recent courses and workshops that I've been teaching. But this is the Mississippi Supreme Court in 1859, and it's regarding a case where a 9-year-old Black girl had been raped by a Black male. It doesn't cite the age of the Black male, but it, so I don't necessarily know exactly how old he was, but it's saying that he was a man, but we just don't know. But what they decided in this case is that young Black girls and Black women, because Black women are hypersexual creatures, that rape could not be committed upon them, and that rape was only rape when it pertained to white women. So the court concluded that a male slave could only commit a rape upon a white woman. And in the detail of the actual transcript, and what they're saying is that the crime of rape does not exist. So according to white male logic, white male predatory, narcissistic, psychopathic logic, the crime of rape does not exist in the state between African slaves. Our laws recognize no marital status as between slaves. Their sexual intercourse is left to be regulated by their owners. The regulations of law as to the white race on the subject of sexual intercourse do not and cannot, for obvious reasons, apply to slaves. Their intercourse is promiscuous, and the violation of a female slave by a male slave would be rather a mere assault and battery. So I want you to think about that. Who is making the laws and designing what is criminality and what isn't? So let's get this straight. Young Black girls and Black women can't be raped because we're projecting our idea that they are hypersexual, hyper promiscuous, right? That idea is promoted and projected onto Black girls and women for hundreds of years. And then white men take and realize their fantasies by projecting these fantasies, these very distorted and perverse ideas onto Black women. So much so that, what do? We create an entertainment structure that prioritizes, positioning Black women such as a Megan Thee Stallion, a Cardi B, Beyonce. And again, it's not a criticism of the women at all. We're talking about the economic and political implications, the cultural implications that have been at play, these dynamics that have been at play for hundreds of years. People not having a choice to choose what their realities are going to be, right? Like it crosses so many levels. Rochelle?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we continue to be a commodity. And I think you shared previously, it wasn't even until 1951 that someone finally had been convicted for raping a Black woman. So
A white male, 1959.
Thank you, 1959. So I mean that's in my mother's lifetime,
Yep.
But all of this is, again, it's how the topic is how does it influence our relationships with each other? And there's no way that you can live in this and not navigate away from it when this is what you've been taught and seen and digested, and now you're regurgitating. And I like I said, people need this. We need help. We need to understand where it came from in order to try to work on fixing it.
Absolutely so. Anyone else want to respond to that before I move on? No, okay. So I'm going to go back to the colony of Maryland, and this is 1664. Okay. And this kind of goes to your point, Alexis. So I'm going to ask that you comment first, because you made the point of how in our gender roles in the society, especially where heteronormative gender is concerned, that men are guided to be producers and providers. And that's kind of where our value is located or centered, right? And so how then does this one example, this is Maryland in 1664, how then does this one example shape how Black men begin to be regarded in this culture and what they represent as a group of people from a value standpoint, centering capitalism, which is the main source of how we regard value in the society in terms of people's worth and net worth, right? How successful they are. How then does this shape what Black men represented, what Black men represent, and who we are as a collective body politic? In this one example, it reads, be it enacted, so this is an act concerning Negroes and other slaves, be it enacted by the Right Honorable, the Lord Proprietary, by and consent of the upper and lower house of this present General Assembly, that all Negroes or other slaves already within the province, and all Negroes and other slaves to be hereafter imported into the province, shall serve durante vita, hard labor for life. So, because within this one reality, you have this one example, all of the agency of Black men being stripped away. You're being forced to work for your entire life against your will. And I want us to think about what does that inspire from an emotional standpoint in Black men? Would you be happy that these people are deciding your fate? Or would you take great issue with it and try to retaliate? even to the degree where you may go out organizing to go and kill the people that are inflicting this type of abuse and trauma onto you, onto your son. Your entire agency is stripped away. So then what does your position in life become as it relates to being a Black male in America, in American society?
I'm like sitting with that and thinking about the emotional space. And I think what, kind of comes up for me is thinking about, you're going through this experience, you're upset, you're angry, you're feeling all these things. And who could you even take that out on? Like, who could you even talk about that with or actually do something? So that kind of is in that like emotional, physical abuse space, right? And then also it makes me think of how this set people up for, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, the criminality that as it is defined by the power structure, right? But sets people up for going down this pathway of, I can't get it the traditional way, so I'm going to go outside of the system, right? And generate money. And I think like, I often am thinking when I see like these young men that end up being in prison, I'm like, why was money so important that it was worth the risk of that, right? But I'm just thinking about how this set up all that dynamic that we see today. Like, I can't get it the traditional way. And the value that's placed on me is about my ability to have this thing. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it, even at the risk of being in prison for the rest of my life. Where it doesn't even matter, because at any point in time, you can decide that you want me to have that experience, right?
Yes, and not even that, just that, Alexis, but I actually have to have resources in order to survive for myself. And that's even further magnified if I have children or if I'm taking care of my parents or having to contribute to my household. I know that that's a lot of the experiences of young Black children, having to contribute to the household. So, of course, when you're going out and you're making choices to survive that you need to make in order to survive, because you understand very, very quickly as you grow up and develop in this culture that most of the opportunities that are on the table for other such men and boys are not on the table for me. And you realize it by looking at your surroundings, experiences that you have when you go to look for work or when you go to the store and people are disregarding you and mistreating you. Through the culmination of all of these experiences, you realize that your worth and value is located in the abyss of how this country regards a person of having status and worth and value, and that you cannot access and or reach the same types of opportunities that are on the table for mediocre, inadequate, incapable white men and other non-Black men. Jess, and then Rochelle.
Yeah, and I think bringing that to now, right, it ties that only a Black man's value is through his work, right? And so you see this kind of notion about, Black men having to be, like Alexa said, be these providers. But how can you be a provider in a system of white supremacy culture? And if you're tying that to your worth, as Alexis was saying, then that worthlessness is transferred over into how you feel about Black women. And you've seen cases, where like in the 60s, or 50s, they talk about men coming home, Black men coming home and acting abuse on their wives because they've had to deal and navigate through white supremacy culture and suppress their anger because of the retaliation of being an empowered and confident Black men. So I think it just trickles down into, again, why our relationships could be so divisive and so hard and based off of trauma, because we're trying to navigate this very notion of the worth being tied to the work, even though the system is not going to allow Black people to only get so far.
You also make me think, Jessica, when you say tying a man's worth to his economic earning, I also feel like the man's worth sometimes is tied to his sexual prowess, his sexual ability, unfortunately. And when you showed that the law about coming over here and serving, you know, hard labor, and we talked about that at some point we became Black, but before we were Ghanaian and we were Ugandan and Nigerian, we weren't Black. And I can't imagine coming over here and you're stripped of that. You're losing all of your identity and your culture and your person, and now you're just lumped to come over here and work. And I can see how all of this culminates to who we are today and the struggles that we are having today.
Absolutely. I was going to get there too, Rochelle, about the penis fetishization of Black men and the penis envy that white men have been preoccupied with forever. So much so that when you go back, for example, to Winthrop Jordan's book, White Over Black, he details in a very robust and stark manner these associations that were made between Black men and chimpanzees, and how Englishmen were writing about the genitals of Black men, the genitalia of Black men, and how large it was, and how they just couldn't believe they had never seen penises like this. And this is way back in the 15th and 16th centuries, before the English come and invade the North American continent. And how that then translated into, my bad. He's actually talking about the 17th century too, and the English being implicated, and how when they first came into contact with these Black men, this was a part of their observations. And so you can tell by the use of the Black male penis in this culture and the way that it's been manipulated and used to go out almost as a weapon, not almost, but as a weapon against girls and women. The Black male prototype, or our identity, and what supposedly represented in our identity, is that we too are hypersexual beings that can be used to be groomed into participating in rape and pedophilia, which again is being facilitated and engineered by white male leaders. Okay. And then Jessica brought into the fold the role that white women play in asserting themselves, aggressing young Black boys and Black men who may have belonged to them, who may have belonged to their husbands. And Dr. Stephanie Jones-Rogers, she does a really great job in her book, They Were Her Property, about detailing the role of white women during the antebellum period, and how by 1860, they were roughly 40% of plantation owners. So the degrees of agency are never comparable. To the degree that even right now, when we look at interracial relationships where white women are concerned, their non-white partners, and specifically Black men, are disempowered because white women hold all the power and control in that relationship. Just ask Jonathan Majors, but I won't even go there. But we have to understand the way that penis fetishization in the bodies of Black boys and men has forever been positioned as hypersexual in this culture, in the ways that we've been positioned in similar ways to Black girls and women. So I'm going to go ahead, Rochelle.
Sorry, it also made me think of the lynching postcards, how when young men were lynched, it wasn't good enough to just hang them, but then they had to disrobe them and then take to cutting their genitals off.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I was going to talk about that. So, right, it's detailed there too, and I really appreciate it. I'm thinking about my former professor and department chair, Dr. Barbara Page, because when I was at Cal State East Bay, we was in Cal State Hayward then, but she did a whole lecture on this, actually a series of lecture about the Black male penis fetishization and the ways in which they always went after our penises. Whenever they lynched us, they would cut them off and take them as souvenirs. And so you see this compulsory obsession living through that that reality, those circumstances. And I so appreciate you for bringing that up, Rochelle, because that was on my mind to mention, and it just I just skipped it. And so to Jessica's point, you have these dynamics, or Alexis, I think you might have alluded to this, being set up with about Black men. What does this inspire within the collective group of these males that are now called Black boys and Black men? Can we all agree that it may inspire some anger? Yeah. You're going to subject me to hard labor for life? You're going to subject me to watching you rape freely my sister, my mother, my daughter, and there's no way for us to respond with any political agency, with any type of agency or collective group power. There's no way for us to stop it. So yes, it inspires anger. And so do you know what white men do? Once these Black men are inspired to go to anger, they say, you know what? You can murder Black men with impunity. So whereas the only law enforced for the punishment of refractory servants resisting their master, mistress, or overseer cannot be inflicted upon Negroes because they are so stubborn that they are not taking freely or casually all of these acts of violence that we're committing onto their daughters, onto their mothers, onto them. We're even, in some cases, using their sons as sexual subjects. And because Black people are not lying down or taking this lying down, we're going to implement this law that says you can control them. We know that you have to use violent means. There's no other way to respond to this situation other than the use of violent means. Be it enacted and declared by this Grand Assembly, if any slave resists his master or other by his master's order correcting him, and by the extremity of the correction, they're calling violence murder correction. By the extremity of the correction of the beatings and whipping, should chance to die, that his death should not be accounted a felony. But the master or that other person appointed by the master to punish him, to punish the Black man, be acquitted from molestation, since it cannot be presumed that premeditated malice, which alone makes murder a felony, should induce any man to destroy his own estate. So what happens then when Dante is being put in charge to chastise and then murder Elijah? How is that informing how I relate to this other Black male? I don't want to commit that violence onto him. I might even be in agreement with him. But in order to save my own life, in order to curry the favor of master or the mistress, I've now got to fall in line to commit abuse against this other Black male, onto the body of this other Black male. And what message then is that sending to young Black boys about how to be in relationship with each other? What message is that sending to other Black men? How and to what degree does this cause total disruption and dysfunction about what it means to be a collective group of people that are called Black boys, that are called Black men? What does this mean? How does this then relate to Black women? I can't even relate. I'm emotionally despondent and unavailable. Jessica.
Yeah, and I what you're describing is our the ways in which we implement anti-Blackness on each other, and how it transmits into today's time. But to your point, what you always say, that this is not the fault of us. This is what we've been socialized into doing, not even socialized, forced into doing. Especially as you're saying, in order for me to survive, I have to kill my brother. I have to rape my sister in order for me to be here, right? This is not something where it's a choice or where it's a, just an ideology that we're taking on. This is something where the system was created in order for us to really perpetuate anti-Blackness on each other, especially with that casual killing act.
Yes, Jessica. Mm-hmm. And now you're given the whip. Jessica, give Dante 30 lashes. You're put in a situation where you've got to now totally denigrate and dehumanize me. And in a cultural context where masculinity matters, unfortunately, you're now set up to emasculate me. Rochelle, and then Alexis.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Jessica, how you said that the anti-blackness, and I'm just imagining if you have to do that to someone you love, who you live with, who you spend your time with, now they don't trust you. Now that relationship is broken. It, I just see it festering. Now I want to get you back because you did it to me, not thinking you were forced to do it by somebody else. Like the psychological warfare that creates, and the horrificness of it, because like you said, if it's somebody I'm with every day, working with, communing with, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also plays into the role. I'm thinking about, like, thinking in modern times now, right? We may not be whipping each other, but we damn sure are being anti-Black in the workplace. We're not hiring each other. We're always trying to have white validation, white approval, and that approval is to be harmful and hard on other Black people. That's how we think we are going to, and that's not even think. That's how we get white validation. And that plays into, again, what we've experienced. But, I've seen this in the workplace, where we are harder on each other, where we throw each other under the bus, where we believe that we can only be the only ones here. And if there's another Black person, I have to now, there is a effort to divide us from each other. Either it's by other white people, or it's by other Black people who are trying to, again, get that white validation, who are addicted to the white supremacy culture.
And also the programming, like you said, Jessica, the forced programming that we have received that makes it so that we don't even need an outside influence to come in. We've been programmed to be misogynistic, anti-Black, so that, I was sharing with you a few years ago, I started hearing many Black men make this comment about, why are Black women so angry, or Black women are a trip, and all of these projections, these very negative, hostile, derogatory projections that this society has cultivated where Black women are concerned. And I became alarmed, because I'm like, which Black women are you in touch with? And what prism are you looking at them through? Because that's not my experience at all with Black women. But to not only that, the danger in generalizing and saying that a whole group of people represent this or are this way, it makes it so that you go into it with a derogatory impression or derogatory beliefs about these people. So you've already set yourself up to believe something that's not even there, or that may not even be there. And then the other piece of it too is, in understanding this history, it became vital to me in my journey as a Black man to understand not only the ways that Black women were unprotected, but that the ways that they were targeted. And so, should there be a righteous anger? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because these dynamics are in play, and they've been in play consistently. But the same with Black men. It made me open up my heart and my soul, the depths of my being, to come into an understanding, a renewed understanding of, whenever I see a Black man that may appear angry, it's righteous anger. These are not tropes, these are realities. And we have to validate and uplift and appreciate the righteous anger that Black women and men have, that we deserve to have, for everything that has been done to us and everything that continues to be done to us. Don't see that as a bad labeling. Any set of human beings, any people being subjected to the realities that in the circumstances that we've been subjected to, they would be angry too. And many of them would probably be trying to commit murders to get revenge. I mean, I am not promoting that or suggesting this on my platform, but I am saying that that's the reality of the situation. So we have to have more empathy, more compassion, and understanding where Black emotionality is concerned, because we've never been given the type of support that any one person or any group of people would need in order to rebound from all of the traumatic inflictions and afflictions that we have suffered.
I wanted to add in, all of this is making me think about the detachment that also had to happen for survival. So when I was thinking, like, how are the people doing this and what do they have to do to be able to hit my brother or rape my sister or whatever? It's the detachment, right? I feel like we often or all can lean into the understanding that enslaved women had to detach from their children because they could be gone at any moment, right? But the same thing had to happen for men who were forced to go to these breeding farms. They didn't even know when they never probably even laid eyes on the child, you know, and they had to detach from that and be okay with that. So just thinking that, yes, there's programming and socialization, but there's also this detachment that at one point was for survival that we need to correct now, right? And that could be why I can't see your perspective, you can't see mine, because I have epigenetics of detachment.
And Alexis, you're making me think about those children that were taken and where Black men were present and they wanted to be fathers and be involved. To have a child taken away from you as a man, it sets you up to not want to love anyone or anything ever again at all. At all. And I think the women are forced to a degree because the child comes through your body. So that's a different experience. But if I'm a man and I'm having that happen to me, I've not gotten to father any of my children. I also saw them taken away and sold and all of these things happening to them. And I also could not participate in their rearing. I had one of the points that W.E.B. Du Bois makes in the book, Black Reconstruction in America, is that these Black adults had no control over their children. The masters had control. The mistresses had control. You couldn't even control your own family. And it just brings me to tears and total grief when I think about this, because there are so many ways that the Black male experience is misunderstood, and we have things projected onto us and about us. That we're mad and we're angry, we're this and that. Black men are doing the absolute best that they can, that we can, to survive this treachery. We can't, and oh my God. Jessica.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you both for saying that, because it's a detachment and a suppression of it, right? And having to do that in order to just survive. But I also think for Black women, I won't say this for Black women, for myself as a Black woman, and it might have even took me having a son, right? And being, I think I disconnected from what Black men were experiencing because I attached myself to white feminist validation, right? I attached myself to this white women feminist movement thinking, well, I'm accomplishing things, and why can't these Black men do it? They should be able to do what I'm doing, not understanding at all the ways in which that if you all breathe a certain way, you are labeled as aggressive and misogynistic. And that because of our alignment as Black women, for various complex reasons, attached ourselves to white feminism, we left you all behind in some sense. We aligned with a white supremacist structure, thinking that if we became sisters with white women, we would also achieve some type of equality as well. Not understanding that alignment actually divided us even further from you all and lessened our ability to really see your experiences. And, I, as I'm doing this work with you, Dante, have heard and seen so many ways where when you show up very firm and confident, I've seen Black women accuse you of being misogynistic and aggressive and hostile and can't be trusted for you holding us accountable. And so I do think that also has to come into we both, in some sense, we've aligned ourselves. I think Black men have been socialized and aligned themselves in a way with white men, and the way that white men perpetuate masculinity. And we align ourselves with white women in the way that they perpetuate white femininity, not understanding the nuances and the complexity of how our orientation is in this country. Black women are never going to be seen as feminine first. We are always going to be seen as Black. There's no way that our femininity looks different. And I don't think that gets talked about enough, that both of us, Black men and Black women, going into this way because of survival really caused more division with us as well too, and it caused us not to see each other's experiences in us surviving this.
Absolutely. We cannot see the fullness of the experiences, Jessica, because to your point, there are so many conditions and so many dynamics in the way that it causes us then to relate to each other through our mental distortions of each other. Like, we're not in touch with each other through the truth of the impacts that this reality has had on us. We're in touch with each other, trying to do the best that we can to relate through the facades that we've had to develop in order to cope and in order to survive. So I can never be fully myself with you or anyone else, because I don't even know what it means to be fully myself outside of the context of my survival as an exploited subject here in America. So I know that I'm truly capable of loving without bounds, but when would I have the opportunity to do that without all of the competing demands of the things that drive me to go after my survival and to try to make it? Because I remember saying to someone, I can't even be in a relationship with anyone if my financial stability is not intact, that I considered relationships to be extracurricular. You know, the fact that I worked so hard through my 20s and 30s, that has set me up, you know, to not be around my mom as much as I wanted to. Love my mom. Everyone knows that I worship the ground my mother walks on. And I would have wanted to be around her every day if I could have been. But I had to work. I had to do things, right? And how true that is in the regard of just trying to just have a relationship with another person, and all of the things that get in the way, that can and that do get in the way of that process in this society. So what is love? Are we truly capable of it? How have we ever known and been able to love outside of the confines of our oppression? No. And so if the onset of the Black experience in this culture is rooted in trauma, that means that everything that we have done has been through a traumatic experience. So what is love then? What is love without trauma? And so I'm going to play this clip that features Alice Walker in an interview that she did not too long ago. And she's talking about just kind of some familial dynamics. And I'm sharing this clip because she says something that's really profound. And I remember when I first heard it, I shared it with Jessica and I go, do you understand what she's saying in this clip? Here we go. Oh, wait, it's not on. Okay, let me go back a bit. Okay.
When their parents are clearly married to each other and to them and are not going anywhere.
At what point, I mean, I imagine as a child you had no sense of this because this was your reality, this was your life. But at what point did it strike you that it was, I mean, there's a particular point in American history, isn't it? I mean, in terms of relations between whites and blacks and, you know, and I mean, help us understand that. I mean, when did that come clear to you?
Well, white people had the most unfortunate ability to cause other people of color, to just feel really lifeless. You could not be yourself around them because they wouldn't tolerate it, for one thing. For instance, you had to always pretend that you thought they were superior. You had to always pretend that you thought they were right. And this had a real dampening effect on people of color because we knew they were not superior and we knew they weren't always right. But it was set up that way. You know, it was a fascist state. And the laws were enforced by terrorism, by beatings and lynchings and disappearances and rapes, and you know, and this had been going on for a few hundred years. So it's really remarkable that people like my parents and my grandparents were able to be people of such grace, even though sometimes they lost it and they were mean to their children or they kicked the dog. But overall, I think it's incredible that they held up as well as they did.
Thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for me, when you shared this first clip, I said, wow, even in that sentence, she said they were mean to the children and they kicked the dog, but they held it together and they had grace.
My parents were remarkable because they had such grace.
Yeah. But
No,
grace
I'm
for
sorry, Jessica.
the conditions, not grace for the family. So the family suffered abuse. The dog suffered the abuse in their rage. But we had grace for the white people that were causing the terrorism because we had to, right? And I think, again, it's an example of the anti-Blackness. And so when you started this conversation earlier, how we parent, how we love each other, it's all been corrupted because we have to go in the world and put on this mask and like she said, pretend that these white people are superior and smart, all to come home and inflict pain and harm on our own. We're harder on our children. We're harder on our partners. We're harder on our dog because we're having to survive terrorism. And as Alexis said, we have to detach and quickly too. It's a rapid detachment because it's going in the workplace and then coming home right after 5 and yelling at the kids, kicking the dog and being so drained because you're having to navigate terrorism.
Yes. And so it's a grace that is underlined by fear. It's not true grace at all because you can't have grace without the trauma. You can't have grace without the fear. So I'm being economically deprived. I'm being mistreated and abused when I go out to go to the store, when I go to the job. I'm being made to enter into the back of the movie theater, the back of restaurants. I'm being completely humiliated in my life. And in my experience here as a Black woman or as a Black man, and I cannot give it back. There's nothing that I can do to respond to the people that are inflicting this humiliation onto me and onto my family. And so the only way that I'm able to release is when I get home. And when I get home, I no longer have to pretend because now as the male figure, as the dominant figure in the household, I can unleash all of the negative emotions that I felt that I had to suppress all day. And so that goes into, I might slap my wife around a few times. I might beat on my children. And that's what she's saying, the dichotomy in what she is saying about, my parents being in this, and I'm expanding this to most Black families, because this was true in my family. My family, my parents were people of such grace, but they beat the children and they had to kick the dog. No, that's releasing trauma and frustration, and most of which is suppressed, emotional suppression, the result of emotional suppression. So it's just very profound. Rochelle and then Alexis, I'll bring you all in for some last remarks.
Yeah, that what hit me is when she said, we know they're not right, but we got to pretend like they're right. And we know they're not smarter, but we have to pretend like they're smarter. And that still hasn't changed. And and speaking to the release when you get home, it made me think about both sets of my grandparents and how my grandfather was the first Black police officer in where they lived, and it just made me think, like, what did he deal with when he came home? Because there was abuse in the family, from him, and I never thought of it that way. I just thought about, like, how dare you do that, but I never thought about potentially, like, what's the underlying reason.
Yes thank you, Rochelle. Alexis?
Yeah, just some of my final thoughts. I think I'm so appreciative of this conversation and how we need to think about our healing and how we can switch some of these dynamics in our community. Because I think for all the faults that we could put on each other, or like, why is this way? Or as I'm going to speak from a perspective as a woman, right? All these things that I could say about Black men aren't doing this, or they're treating me like this, or they're not taking care of their kids. And it's like, well, who's raising them then? Right. So it's like, where's the accountability for my part in this? Right. And just think about the example, like men come and oppress women, but women also oppress children. Right. So like, how do we change that from the beginning so that we can produce different members of society, people that don't have to live in these dynamics or hold on to this past that got us through to this point for whatever reason, but now we have the awareness and the ability to make some changes.
Absolutely. And I'll just say this too, and this is true for women and men. Please hold your sons and just stroke their faces and rub the back of their hair in their hair and tell them it is okay to cry. It is okay to not have it all together. I am here to be your comfort and your refuge. You can express your emotions. Just hold your baby boys. That's the one thing my mother did for me. And it served me so well. I was never afraid to cry. And throughout my life, those releases have just really helped me. But my mom did this at a time when she was married to my dad, who was very, pro machismo and pro heteronormative straight male-ish. And he was very clear that he did not want a son that was going to be a punk. And I remember my mother telling me that they would have knockdown, drag out disputes and fights about, him questioning my value or how I was going to turn out. And my mom telling him like he's going down the wrong path, and that caused conflicts within their marriage. But I was raised around children where I would hear both women and men say to the male children, don't cry, be a big boy. And so if that is the type of person that is being raised, or that's the type of mentality that's being cultivated, and children are being influenced by that thinking and that approach to a male child's development, think about how that then sets them up to not be emotionally responsible, emotionally aware, emotionally connected. And it is very hypocritical and contradictory, because I hear a lot of girls and women, and even myself as a gay man, I want an emotional, available man. And I know a lot of my girlfriends who do as well. But how is that possible when you're telling these young boys to not be in touch with their emotions, because that, to a degree, is a sign of weakness? Last thoughts. We'll go around. Last thoughts. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. I think this is a powerful discussion. I think we probably need a part 2, 3, 4, 5. I do think to and I'm not to say that there's a solution, right? But just being very intentional and loving each other, because there has been such a effort to divide us. Not even an effort. It's been strategic, systematically to divide us. And I think because there is a power in us being together, right? And there's a lot of work that I think both men and women are going to have to do in order to get us back to each other. It's not this person did this person did that. It's a more of how we, as the title of this talk, how we are navigating our love in white America. And it's almost impossible at times to do it. And I think the more that we are able to understand these dynamics and have grace and love with each other, the more we can get back to how we loved each other outside of white supremacy and white surveillance. So yeah.
White sociopathic and psychopathic conditioning. That's right. Thank you, Jessica. Rochelle.
Yeah, I would just say, again, through this journey, it's being more understanding and have a lot of forgiveness, and also asking more questions to try to understand better than thinking that you know everything, so that you are still open to learning and hearing someone else's experience and why they are how they are today. Thank you.
That's right, sis. Thank you very much. But endless forgiveness, and it's a trip because Jessica and I were having a discussion, and we were saying how we sometimes go back and forth because we're trying to understand these gender dynamics, and we realize the perversion on both sides, and the ways that we've been corrupted by white, narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic, predatory behavior, and the psychology of predation. So there's just, to your point, Rochelle, endless, boundless empathy, compassion, forgiveness that we have to be willing to practice tapping into in order to get to that place that Jessica spoke about, that place of restoration. Yeah. Alexis, do you have any other last thoughts before we sign off?
Just appreciative of this conversation and looking forward to keeping the conversation going.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lex. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Rochelle, for being here. I am just going to share very briefly for those of you who may not have been able to access or watch the docuseries, the Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness docuseries, which is a 10-part episodic series that actually features Alexis, it features Jessica, it features Rochelle. It's a docuseries that I produced ahead of my book that actually talks about the themes that we discussed here today, as well as some additional themes that are presented in my book. So please go to DanteKing.com or to Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness.com, and you will be able to pull up this page that has the docuseries listed on it. And if you go to the watch page, you can see clips and summaries of each episode, what's contained in each episode. This was something that I produced myself through my nonprofit, which is called Blackademics. So please support Blackademics, please support this work, and please use this docuseries as a tool and a way to start some very important and crucial conversations with your family members, with your friends, as a way to begin a journey of healing if you've not already started. And if you've started that journey of healing, this is a way to continue it. Please also buy the book. You can go to my website, DanteKing.com, and you'll see here the opportunity. You can either get the book, whether it's through like Amazon or Barnes & Noble online. If you go to any online global retailer, you should be able to buy the book from there. But please dedicate, even if it's just 5 pages a day, please read the book if you are Black, or if you know someone who is Black. Please get them this information, because to the discussion that my sisters and I had here today, we have to work on individual and group and collective healing. We really do. If we're ever going to try and survive this, and reset who we are, who we want to be, what we represent within and throughout our community. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone who tuned in too. And I look forward to seeing all of you who will attend on July 19th in Oakland, Saturday, July 19th, the Blackademics Boot Camp. Again, 10 scholarships available. Go to the website, submit the contact page if you want to go, and someone on my team will get back to you and confirm with you whether a spot can be reserved or has been reserved for you. Okay, but if you submit a request for a scholarship, please make sure you make it, because if you submit a request to attend and then you don't make it, that's a spot that could have gone to someone else. So I just want to make sure that you're moving as it pertains to this with the greatest amount of integrity and truth and honor. Okay. So again, thank you, everyone. And thank you to my beautiful sisters. Can we give them a round of applause? And you give yourselves a round of applause too. That's right. These are the bosses. Okay. All right. Love you, love you, love you. See you soon.